I am James Milan, and this is a candidate profile for the 4th Middlesex District State Senate race. We are going to be doing this profile in the form of a conversation, and we are here with our state rep, Sean Garballey. Sean, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, James.
We do appreciate this opportunity to delve a little more deeply into a number of issues of interest to you and to Arlington and Arlingtonians.
My pleasure.
I wanted to begin by inviting you to basically, people I know many are familiar with your work already and your record, but why don't you do a self-introduction to the audience of those parts of your background that you think are going to be most relevant for the voters.
Terrific. Well, James, thanks for interviewing me, and thanks to ACMi for doing this great work and for covering the debate as well. I'm Sean Garballey. I've been honored to be your state representative for the past 9 years, representing Arlington and Medford in the House of Representatives. Before I was elected to the House of Representatives, I served 3 years on the Arlington School Committee. So when we elect our next state senator, it's really important to have somebody who can hit the ground running. And I believe I'll be able to use my experience in municipal government, my 9 years of direct legislative experience and accomplishments, to benefit the people of Arlington, Lexington, Woburn, Billerica, and Burlington as their next state senator.
To begin with, I wanted to ask you, you have said at various times that you feel like you are the most experienced candidate in this race. And I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a little bit with some concrete examples on what is it. Give us a couple of examples of what you're thinking of when you say that.
Sure. Well, the choice before us is to elect somebody to be our next state senator, to be our voice for families from Arlington and the other parts of the district in the state Senate. I've been the families of Arlington's voice in the House of Representatives as their legislator. So I'm currently a legislator. I'm running to be a legislator in another body. And if you look at my experience, whether it's writing legislation, filing legislation, and getting it passed, that has made a profound impact on the lives of people in Arlington and in Massachusetts. That's the kind of experience that's so important, to have somebody with that legislative experience who knows how to work with 199 other men and women from across the Commonwealth on delving into matters of public policy and trying to get those bills passed. I've done that. I'm the only candidate who's done that. And I think that's a very, very important thing when we're trying to figure out who's best to replace our champion and our great friend, Ken Donnelly. If you look at the legislation I have filed, whether it's around health insurance and health insurance coverage, we passed those bills. Now kids have hearing aid coverage, they have protein disorder coverage. We're working on others. If you look at the role I played on the MBTA as the chair of the Caucus in preventing cuts to our service throughout the 4th Middlesex District, I was able to do that by building a coalition of reps and senators to get that done. And I think that's really what is so important for a state rep or a state senator, someone who can bridge alliances among geographical, ideological difference among legislators to try to get things done. And that's what I've done for the past 9 years. And that's why I think I'm the most experienced, but certainly the most that person with the best perspective and the best suited to serve the people of the 4th Middlesex District as their next state senator. And
in the way that you've been, as you said, at this for 9 years in the State House as it is, does your work naturally bring you into contact with and needing to deal with state senators to the same degree as you are dealing with your fellow representatives?
It does. So I'm the chair of 2 caucuses. One is the Public Higher Education Caucus, where we work to try to advance all 29 campuses across the state of public higher learning. The other is around, my chairmanship of the MBTA caucus, fighting for a transit system, not just in the MBTA region of 175 communities, but also the RTAs, and speaking about how to improve our infrastructure across the Commonwealth. The Public Higher Education Caucus I founded and chaired with the Senate President, Stan Rosenberg, and the Transportation Caucus I chair with Linda Dorsina Forey, who's the state senator from Boston, and Jamie Eldridge, who's the state senator from Acton. And I've worked with many senators. Many of them are endorsing me and have indicated their support of my candidacy. Because remember, a lot of the senators, I'd say about half, were reps themselves, maybe even more than half. So I already have a very collaborative working relationship with most of the state senators, Democrat and Republican.
A couple of topics of particular interest to Arlingtonians, I think, that we have discussed in previous conversations, but I wanted to bring up again. The first is local aid.
Yep.
And while it has been clear from previous conversations this is a tough subject, the record, it looks like to us, in looking at the data over the last 9 years, is that Arlington, if it hasn't stagnated in terms of the amount of local aid it's received, it's been a relatively modest amount, about 13%, I think, is what we looked at and found over the course of the 9 years. There are surrounding communities, some of them outside of the district, some of them inside of the district, including Lexington, which have apparently, by those numbers, fared better. Mm-hmm. That's a record of your time in office, so feel free to either explain how that has, or to both explain how that has unfolded in that way, and what ideas you have for ensuring that despite Arlington's population density, et cetera, and the things that we're familiar with, despite those ideas that you might have for improving the flow of local aid to Arlington, especially if there's anything that isn't, already being tried within the system and that we just need to keep trying harder.
Absolutely. You raise a very good question. I've spent the last 9 years trying to change the local aid formula, trying to change Chapter 70, trying to change unrestricted general government aid. Those are the two formulas that the town of Arlington receives our funding through: Chapter 70 for education, unrestricted general government aid in areas. But if you do look at Chapter 70 for unrestricted, Chapter 70 for education, UGA, we call it for kind of the town side, and Chapter 90, which is funding for our roads, road repair here in Arlington, it's been about a 20% increase, actually, if you look since 2008 to now. So I think Arlington has received certainly an increase from after the recession. And I've been working on trying to put more money into Chapter 70 and into Chapter 90 because that would help the town of Arlington because it's been an increase. But you raise a very good point, and that is communities like Arlington, and there's about 15 of them that are pretty densely built up. The formula does not support us as much as the formula supports other communities, and that's because the formula doesn't take into account densely populated communities and a community's really inability to grow a commercial tax base, which communities like Burlington and Waltham can. Communities like Arlington can't because we're such a dense community as you raised. And that has been something that I've been working on with my colleagues, and one of the fruits of that labor, so to speak, is the Foundation Budget Review Commission. I was one of the original sponsors of that commission, and it was actually about 10 reps who had communities that were negatively impacted by the local aid formula. We met back in 2010 and said we need to do better. We need to figure out how to build a coalition among reps to address this concern. And one of the challenges about that is that if there's 15 reps who are doing poorly under the formula, then there's over 100 that are doing reasonably well. So how do you convince those reps whose communities are helped by the formula to want to change it, putting their community in possible jeopardy of not doing so well? Mm-hmm. So we really pushed to this, and it was known as the Foundation Budget Review Commission. And what we really wanted to focus on, and the foundation budget, is that amount of money that is deemed necessary to properly fund public education and what the gap is. We did the study. As I said to you, James, I was one of the original sponsors. We got it passed. The commission just released their report about a year ago. And what the report founded was that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts shorts or underfunds public education about $500 million every year, specifically for cities and towns for special education costs, health insurance costs, transportation costs. And so one of my initiatives has been to fully implement the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and that would be a specific thing that would really help Arlington. How do we afford it?
That's exactly, you anticipated my question.
So what I've been strongly in support of, obviously, is prioritizing public education to the detriment of maybe some other budget items, but also my leadership around the Fair Share Amendment and voting for that and work in strategizing and building alliances in the House to make sure we have the votes to get that passed. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. We're going to vote on it for the second time, and then it would appear on the 2018 ballot for the voters of the Commonwealth to decide, and it would be a 4% increase on the income tax for those individuals in the Commonwealth making $1 million a year or more. And I think that's an important initiative, and I've been proud to be the only candidate in the race who's voted for it and has worked very hard within the legislature in trying to get that on the ballot for the voters to decide. But I don't think we should wait to 2018. I've been very active in saying I think we need new revenue now to fund the report, the recommendations of the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and I'm working within the House trying to figure out what forms of revenue would get the support of my colleagues.
Well, you did mention as part of the answer that you would be willing yourself to prioritize this to, as you put it, potentially the detriment of some other budget items. Would you be willing to name a couple of areas in which you would be willing to see less money spent in order to have more money spent on public education?
Absolutely. So, if you look at our budget, we have about a $40 billion budget. And if you look at another part of our budget, it's called the Expenditure Budget. And it's all the areas of tax deductions, and different corporations get to write things off because of the benefits they received from the Commonwealth. And that is direct revenue that we're expending for those tax credits. So a perfect example, James, is the Fidelity Tax Credit and the tax credit on aviation for airplanes. And there's a whole host of them. There's a lot of good tax credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit. But there's a lot of tax credits. We'll talk about the Fidelity Tax Credit. So this tax credit was initiated in the 90s, and the goal around the tax credit, and some of these tax credits were very well intentioned because it's really around economic development and job growth. And a lot of the Fidelity Tax Credit, specifically in the 90s when it was adopted, there was a promise from Fidelity: we get this tax credit, we'll grow the amount of jobs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Worthy goal, very important. Job creation is certainly one of my top priorities to grow here in the Commonwealth. But the problem is, as the market collapsed and businesses took a hard hit after the boom of the 90s, right? Those jobs went away. People faced massive layoffs, but guess what didn't change? The tax credit. The tax credit benefit that Fidelity and other corporations stayed the same, and it remains the same now. I'm not saying we have to get rid of these tax credits, but if we're underfunding education in all 351 cities and towns by $400 million a year, based on what the Foundation Budget Report Commission came out and said, then that needs to be on the table. And we have to figure out what we want to prioritize as a Commonwealth, especially if the intended tax credit is not providing the amount of jobs that was promised by the corporation when the tax credit was enacted in the first place.
So I can hear the determination in your voice to be able to do something about that. I'm wondering how you gauge the chances of that kind of thing being successful. Are you optimistic about the chance to roll back some of these tax credits you're talking about? Are you resigned to the fight, not resigned, but committed to the fight, but not too hopeful? What are the prospects for that kind of, for real change happening there?
It's a great question, James. So some tax credits are more supported than others. The Earned Income Tax Credit is something that's very supported in the legislature. The Fidelity Tax Credit is supported among some, but it's not widely supported. And I think we have some real ground there to try to pass. Now, none of these things are easy lifts. They're difficult. They're going to take a lot of persistence among advocates in communities to call their representatives and senators and ask them to prioritize this as an issue to take on. But it's also going to take the legislature to have the will to do it. And it really takes that experience of a rep or a senator being able to put in a room 30 or 40 other legislators and try to advance a cause. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but that's certainly what I've done for the past 9 years around specific issues, try to bring in reps with different ideological opinions than myself, different geographical concerns, different concerns from their district than what I have here in Arlington, and figure out where we can reach common ground and what we can agree on. And based on my conversations thus far on some of the tax credits, we have reached common ground. And now it's just trying to push leadership in the House and the Senate to take it up.
Okay.
But that really is predicated on people in the Commonwealth who want to see the Foundation Budget Review Commission, those recommendations get implemented, push back on their own reps and senators and say, you need to go to Beacon Hill, you need to properly fund education, you need to properly fund higher ed, you need to properly fund early ed. And with that kind of a demand, I think we can get there, but certainly I can't do it by myself. But I try to do it by building coalitions among the reps and senators at the State House.
Well, speaking of heavy lifts, here is a subject with which I know you're very familiar, but I want to focus our conversation about it in a particular way. And so I'm talking about the MBTA, and the fact that we are all very well aware of the issues that confront the MBTA, both the operation, revenue stream, the fact that $500 million has been estimated necessary each year. It's underfunded in that way just for operating revenue. There's the debt obligation that you've often talked about, and there's the pension responsibility.
Talked about it last night.
Yep. What do you see as the best mechanism that is currently perhaps in play, that is currently operating in some way, whether it's a committee that's been formed? I know recently a committee has been formed to be looking at some of these issues. What do you see as the best chance to address the current problems or challenges for the MBTA? And go ahead and give that answer as fully as you'd like. And then I would like to know, looking at the future, both in terms of technological innovations that are coming down the pike and in terms of structural changes that you think could be made, what does the MBTA look like? How can we use it to get more people out of their cars and into the system, that kind of thing? So a vision of the future after your take on what can be done right now. Or
Great question, James. And I guess I'll address the vision piece first, because we can't get there until we deal with the problems today facing the T. And even worse, if we continue to kick the can down the road, the future in terms of ridership and the amount of cars on the road will be so negative that our transportation system will literally collapse. Currently, we are operating on the verge of collapse. The reason we're not collapsing is because we honestly have one of the best workforce men and women working on the MBTA in the country. And the statistics and the records bear that out. So the governor has proposed many times privatizing some of the jobs around the machinists and in the 4 garages around the MBTA region. And that's just, quite honestly, it's a distraction. It's a distraction from what the real problem of the MBTA is. To assume that it's the workers' fault why the MBTA is on the verge of collapse is just not accurate, especially when if you look at miles traveled between breakdowns, Massachusetts performs better than any other state, including number 2, which is New Jersey.
So let's give the workers their due, absolutely.
So it's really important. So when the governor says one of the things that he needs to fix the T is more ability to hire, and to privatize, that's not going to fix the T. How we're going to fix the T, and this is the truth, and you said this, what is the best mechanism to do that? It's to pass my debt relief bill. And that's honestly the best way to do it, because what it would do is it would take the debt off the MBTA, that big dig debt, and there's other parts of debt, not just big dig debt, but it adds up to that $5 billion debt, and force the Commonwealth to pay it down. Follow-up question being, well, how are you going to pay it down? That's a different question. But the most important part is to make sure it's not saddled with that debt, because we pay 35 cents on every dollar that comes in for revenue to the T. That 35 cents could be taken and used for operational support, for maintenance, for vision sessions on growing, infrastructure here in the Commonwealth. That's a huge aspect of the problem that we're facing, and how I think it's best to address it. But the truth is, we need the revenue to go along with it.
So where are the revenue sources? Are you willing to increase taxes? And if so, beyond the fair share amendment, which you've already explained, would you be willing to increase income tax, sales tax, payroll tax?
So the answer is yes, but it also depends. And it depends because last session we had a revenue vote, and the revenue vote was poised as we're going to fix the MBTA. And what it did was raise the gas tax 3 pennies. It was a drop in the bucket. It did not fix the T. It did not address the debt. We've been lucky these past couple of winters because the winters haven't been like 2015. But if they were, the MBTA would have collapsed again. And so we did a tax increase, promised the taxpayers of Massachusetts that we have fixed the concerns and the issues surrounding the MBTA, but it didn't do it. It was a drop in the bucket. So I am certainly in support of revenue. I have filed legislation to increase the payroll tax, to look at other forms of revenue to go directly to the MBTA. But I will only take a tax vote if the revenue is adequate and if the revenue is progressive. Because I think the taxpayers of Massachusetts want a 21st century transportation system that's modernized, that can get people to and from home and work every day, that can get their kids to school to and from every day, and they're willing to pay for it, but they want to make sure that if their taxes get raised, it's going to fix the problem. And that's what didn't happen when we took that revenue vote. So I am more in support than you may realize, James, in terms of increasing revenue for the MBTA. I think it's an essential part of the solution in addition to figuring out the structural debt. But in doing so, we need to make sure the revenue is adequate, that we're actually going to fix the problems with the MBTA. And if that's the case, then I think we should move towards that vision. But if it's not, it's just going to be more unfulfilled promises that we're making to the taxpayers and to the families of the Commonwealth without really fixing the MBTA, which doesn't allow us to look towards the future of that vision of the kind of public transit system that we deserve as a Commonwealth and need, quite frankly, because it's our economy. Our economy, the success of our economy is based on public transportation.
What are 2 other priorities that you are committed, just absolutely committed to pursuing as our state senator, should you be in that position?
It's a great question. One would be obviously public transportation, but I discussed that a little bit. One is in the area of public higher education. Public higher education is something that's so critically important to me. We need to better invest in the 29 campuses across the state. I'm trying to enact what's known as the Finish Line Grant, which would allow students who are in public higher ed who can't afford to continue to receive scholarships and to be able to finish their 2nd or 4th semester. That's something that's very, very important to me, as well as early education. Now, if you look at the issue of poverty, if you look at the issue around why our schools are failing, why we can't close the achievement gap, it's really boils down to early education. And that is the cost of it is so unaffordable for families on fixed incomes, right? And if you look at early education, the instructors, our professionals, our teachers literally make $25,000 a year. So there's a revolving door, and they can't afford to stay in their position. So one of the things that I really want to work on when I'm a state senator is to figure out, one, how to increase quality of early education programs, but two, how to increase the amount of money that early educators are making, because if they're making a livable salary like their public school counterparts, $20,000 more, they would stay in the jobs longer. It wouldn't be a revolving door, and our kids would have better outcomes when it comes to early education. And obviously the other issue would be around healthcare and trying to implement a single payer system to tackle the greed of the insurance companies. And that's especially important because 47% of our budget is around healthcare. And because if the form of healthcare reform is passed at the federal level of what the United States House of Representatives did, then we're going to lose $1.5 billion in revenue. That's a serious amount of money in a $40 billion budget when 47% of our costs are in our health care alone.
All right, thanks for that. And we'd like to try and close these profiles with distilling things down to the personal and just asking you a simple question, or a two-part question. One is, what strength, personal strength of yours might people not be aware of that you bring both to this business and to your life in general? And the converse of that. What is a lesson learned or a challenge for you in doing this work that you're ready to own up to here on television?
One is I never give up. I've been in the legislature for 9 years. A lot of my bills have been passed and have become law. A lot of them haven't. And part of being a legislator is trying to figure out what your weaknesses are and where you failed and try to do better. And so I focus a lot of my time on trying to build relationships with my colleagues to try to get my legislation passed. One of my weaknesses is I'm not a very patient person. And in the legislature, when it takes the average bill 5 to 10 years to pass because of those unintended consequences of a pending piece of legislation, you really need to be patient and to work with people. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how I can be more patient and calm. And I balance that with my ability to work with a lot of different perspectives and trying to use those strengths to balance out my weaknesses and trying to push legislation, get legislation passed and signed into law. But I've enjoyed my work in the House of Representatives incredibly. And to be able to take what I've learned in the House, to take that perspective, to take that accomplishment and carry it over to the Senate, where I would be one of 40 instead of one out of 160, and use that to benefit the people of the 4th Middlesex District, is something that, quite honestly, I believe I'm prepared for. I believe I'm the only candidate prepared for. And something that I would enjoy very much if the voters will have me continuing that role in the Senate on behalf of them and their families on June 27th.
Thank you very much, Sean. We appreciate it. That's Representative Sean Garballey, who spent this time with us, and we, as I said, do appreciate it. Don't forget to vote, as Sean was just mentioning, on June 27th. That primary is the race, in this case, for the 4th Middlesex District State Senate seat. I'm James Milan. On behalf of Sean Garballey and ACMi, thanks for joining us.